Welcome to the August edition of Key Ministries Disability Ministry Video Roundtable. So today, I'm really excited about this topic and even kind of getting ready for it. I've already learned so much. So today we're going to talk about making our websites as accessible as our ministries. So this is kind of a twofold topic today. So part of it is what kind of content do you want to have on your website, either your church website or your ministry website, for potential families who may be and individuals who may be looking to check out what you have to offer. We're also going to talk about how you can make your content more accessible, perhaps for somebody who uses assistive technology, to visually engage with your website, and just how to help with other types of disabilities as well. So I don't think I introduced myself. My name is Beth Golick, and I am with Key Ministry, and my partner in crime over here, Catherine Boyle, is our Director of Mental Health Ministry at Key Ministry, and we're excited about this topic today. So I did reach out to some individuals who I know use assistive technology, and I'm glad Bob is on here today. He's been super helpful talking to me, getting ready for this. And then some other folks provided me with information that couldn't be here today. So I am not the expert. I think it's really helpful when we can hear from people who have engaged, who are using this type of technology to access websites. But I think we can all contribute to this conversation because this is, we all need to look at our websites as an outsider, and what kind of information we're providing and how are we making it accessible. So let's see, let's start with let's talk with making the content more accessible to someone who perhaps has a visual impairment. So Bob, you, not to call you out, but you have provided me some great information. So I want you to jump in at any point, and anybody else that has experience using assistive technology, by all means jump in. But I'm going to start just by throwing out a couple things that were sent to me as these are things that your website that you need to be doing. And then I want everybody to jump in. But one of the things that was that it's really important is that when you're using images, that you use the alt text. And what this does is allow somebody who's using some type of screen reader to hear what your image is. And so there are different, depending on, if you use Squarespace to build your website, like there's different ways, and you can Google how to make sure that you're using alt text. And anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but Bob, it's my understanding if you're using, let's say, well, this is in social media, but in social media, if you're using a bunch of emojis, what the viewer is going to hear is smiley face, smiley face, smiley face, smiley face, smiley face. If you're using a whole bunch of emojis in a row, which I guess that's a whole nother topic, is social media. But does anybody have any questions about?
You're on the right path with the. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
But you are on the right track when we're talking about the alt text. Is that if you have a photo in there, that if I'm using a screen reader, or there are software that can be loaded into the computer, such as one that's called JAWS, that allows a person to be able to access a website, and the screen reader or the JAWS software would identify what it is. If we're using the alt text, then I can be able to identify what an image may be, and that's one of the advantages of that. That way you're not precluded from really using your website and having pictures that are necessary or somehow aesthetically pleasing, but the person that's using a screen reader or a magnifier, that sort of thing, can identify what the picture is, and the software can access that information. rather than just having a picture placed on the website.
So can you give us an
And that
example
allows
of,
the person.
oh, sorry.
No, no,
Can you give us an example
no. You
of,
want an example?
yeah, good alt
Yeah.
text
Well,
and
so
then
yeah, if I
bad?
have a picture of maybe of a service that's going on, and I wanted to put it in there, or perhaps so you have an image of a service going on, or even a Bible study where there's a person in a wheelchair that's there. That by using my screen reader or JAWS and making sure that I can access that website by either a mouse or a pointer or my keyboard as I manipulate around the website, I come across the image, then using the alt text will be able to let the software tell me what the image is.
Okay. And what would be a good way to describe, let's say it is a picture of like a congregation in the middle of worship. What would be a good way to describe that, and maybe a not so good way?
Well, just be very clear and concise. This is our worship group, or this is our Bible study, uh, and just that. And if you're trying to identify that there it is wheelchair accessible, something very concise like that.
Okay, great. And if an image on a website is purely there for, decoration type of thing, do you say that in the alt text?
I would say that the only time that I wouldn't say that is if you're using logos. You can ignore those. I wouldn't have alt text to identify just a logo or just a quick sign.
Okay, okay. So I discovered that, I think it's with Squarespace, but no, MailChimp, I don't know, what, something that I use. The alt text automatically is whatever the image is called. I think it's Squarespace. So
Yes.
if your image is named, Key Ministry logo dot JPEG or whatever, that's how it's going to be read. So that's a little tip for you there. Make sure you're naming your images. People are going to, hear what you've named your images. So make sure those are named correctly.
Ideally, I think if I can just jump in for a minute,
Absolutely.
you may want those to match. So consider as you upload images that the title and the alt text you've taken that into account. So for us, we use a lot of most of our images all have text on them, so a scripture reference. So we might highlight the main part of that scripture, just a portion of it. So it might be, if we're using Psalm 16:11, we might just say, in your presence, there's fullness of joy. And that's also the title of the actual image that we upload. And it's also important, because I have a technical connection, that when you put those titles, whatever they are, that you not use spaces. You use hyphens or underscores between the words. While it might not be as pleasant to see in an alt text, and you can certainly update that and remove it, it makes it so that it works well on the technical side of things, and it's just a kind of a rule of thumb, if you will.
Okay, good to
that
know.
We've discovered.
Good, thank you. So another thing that I learned is that your search bar on your website needs to be prominent. And so that's something, again, if you're in charge of your website, you can do some, easy Googling to see how you do that. But so check your church's or your ministry's website, and, talk to whoever your web person is if you don't have a search bar in a very prominent location. Any comments or suggestions on that one?
I think that I would also suggest that you use dramatic colors. You have the square for the space for the search, maybe white, and with a dark blue or strong contrasting colors. There's
Okay.
nothing worse for me to have the search bar on a white background with a white square where I'm supposed to type in things.
Okay, good call. And I know that in Squarespace you can choose like that's part of when you add a search bar, you can choose dark or light. So that's good to know.
In that same vein, one of the things that we just recently did as a result of thinking about this and anticipating this conversation is looking at the text color that you've chosen for your website as a whole. You know, the more contrast, I think, Bob, as you mentioned, we were using what was kind of the standard built-in, which is kind of a gray, but gray on white is hard to see. So we went to a darker, not so stark. We didn't do completely black because that, you know, just really was overwhelming because we have both sides, right? We want to be able to be accessible to folks who have needs in that area, but other people that's overwhelming too. So something that's not so light that it's hard to be contrasted with your background was helpful to us. So thanks for getting us started to think about this.
I know
Yes,
this kind of opens up all these other things, and actually that idea that Pam just talked about actually kind of translates also into making sure that our services, I mean, most of us are online for our services right now, but if you do have visuals like slides that go along with your service, that you need to have high contrast colors for your slides as well. So like black and white or blue and yellow are two suggestions. So if also, just for 1 second, because since we just talked about those slides for service, if you are using slides for service, make sure you use a large font as well. And so this is just to help people who have, you know, who you know, might have some vision, but like low vision. Okay, great.
Also, the font choice. The font choice is also an issue because so many times letters run into one another. So, you know, while it may be unexciting to use some kind of dull font, it makes it much more accessible for folks to read, no matter, you know, if you're getting older and your eyesight's not where it used to be. So it's really hard when it's small, it's too small, and it's not a clear font.
Yes, agree.
Is there a way we can have an example, like your website, Pamela?
Which church are you talking about that you're coming from, so we could go and look at it?
I'm not from a church. We have a not-for-profit organization. It's chronic-joy.org. We've been implementing some of these things and a few others that I'll let Beth lead us into as we've begun to think about how we are more accessible and inclusive, because those are really important hallmarks of who we are. We want compassion, inclusion, and then ultimately relationship, because we need to think about the person on the other side of that screen, the other side of the website, as a real person, not just this is a website thing and it's great that, you know, somebody might pop in here. If it's for somebody I love, what would I want it to represent? And that's kind of been the hallmark of how we've thought about that.
I love that. So, Catherine, are you able to throw that in the chat, the website for Chronic Joy?
Yes.
And definitely check them out. And actually, so Pam was a guest on one of our webinars. So if you go to keyministry.org and look at our, Addie's already found it and she loves it. If you go to our Vimeo page, the Key Ministry Vimeo page, you'll be able to see Pam and her colleague in action. All right, so also, let me just throw out another website, and I haven't checked it out, but the person who gave me a lot of this information, that's her ministry, and that's the Banquet Network. And so I know they've been working really hard to make their website fully accessible as well. So let's see. Oh, let's talk about headings on your website, descriptive headings. Bob, do you have any suggestions or maybe some examples of, you know, what has worked and what hasn't, and what you find useful?
Well, you can be very clear with it, and aesthetically we can still use that, but just make sure that it is clearly identified, and physically it is a heading, and then there is a space, and then the text beneath it. Using headings or even subheadings are fine to manipulate around. The other thing that can help with those is to use a different color font, or maybe even bold.
Okay. And
I'm chiming in again. We like to use a multitude of things because there's that color thing is great, but in some cases it's really more if we can identify headings in terms of think of an outline so that we can help people to track through the entire page or through the entire post, because color is a great thing and we love to use that, but we think that sometimes it's just as important for it to be appropriately sized. Think about what's most important, right? So that your title heading is going to come in first, and then, you know, that H2 heading would be the next most important set of things, and things underneath that as well. So it helps also that if we're consistent and we use those, folks can key in on those important points and go back and find them. So color is helpful, but also I think bold is very helpful, especially if you're trying to draw attention, even in the text itself, highlighting key phrases, maybe a great quote, because those are the things that we can go back to, even if we can't, you know, we can't get all the way through it again, or we couldn't get all the way through it. We can at least grab the high points.
that's great. Thank you. So I have a question. What if you have, as part of your text, you have, let's say it's an event that you're promoting, and you need people to click on something to register for the event. So what is the best, most user-friendly way to do that? Is there a particular wording that you use and hyperlink it? Or Bob, what's your experience on that?
I think what you want to do is identify within the text, if you want further information or to register for this event, click here. Just don't leave the link out there.
Okay.
And assume that people that are using a screen reader will be able to find it, or by using color or those sorts of things. If you preface it by saying, please, you know, for further information or to get further details or to find out more, click here, and have that built into the sentence, and then the link. Otherwise, I may not know what the link is. If it's just there, I get lost, but at least that way I can get back to it. That seems to be the most helpful. Identify it, just don't have a link right there on its own.
And can that be in the form of a button, or does it need to be text, or should it be both?
We like to use both if possible. The button really jumps out in color, and we like to use things more like learn more to help people, or, you know, that kind of thing. But the buttons, for whatever reason, again, you can build that contrast in, you know, a dark background, light text, or vice versa, so that it sort of jumps out. That it's also a great call to action. So if you really do want people to take that next step, and it's easy, again, to track back to the button if you've read it and not sure where you want to be. Much like your email today, it had all this information, but at the bottom, the most important part was click this button to get to where you need to be.
All right, good. Let me see what else I want to talk about. So one of the things that that Bob had sent me was avoid the timeouts without warnings. So, you know, when you've been on a website and maybe you're filling out a form and you walk away for a second and then you come back and you've timed out. And a lot of times it's because you know, you're a bank, or it's a bank or something, and you can't leave sensitive information up there. But give the user an opportunity to extend that time limit. So that was a suggestion that was brought up. Let's see. Do you want, let's see, tables and frames? Is that something, Bob, that you can address? Tables and frames? Or is that too technical for what we're working with?
Well, we just realized that just if you want to use tables and those sorts of things, they still are accessible through a screen reader if they're done properly. So it isn't something that you have to exclude because I want to be accessible. Go ahead and use them. It is possible to do that. And if anybody had any further questions, they certainly could contact me or whomever, but it is possible to do that.
Okay. All right, good. Show of hands, and you can either raise your hand, you can click the little, there's a little hand raise icon on your thing. How many of you actually have the ability to, like, you have control over the website of your ministry or of your, you know, of your church? So a couple of you, maybe a third of you do. Okay. And so for the rest of you, this is information that you would provide to your webmaster or whatever. Okay, great. That's helpful. So use abbreviations wisely is another tip that Bob shared with me. And I think that one kind of makes sense. And I think that makes sense for, you know, not just those who maybe are reading using assistive technology, but for everybody. I used to be in higher ed, and we refer to this as, you know, alphabet soup. Like, there's so many abbreviations for everything. And that can be really confusing if you're not familiar with what those abbreviations mean. Before we move
And it's
into,
also helpful
yeah, go ahead.
if you were to use period, if you use periods in between the letters so that a person using a screen reader will realize that this is an abbreviation.
Okay.
Or an acronym. Yeah.
Because otherwise they would try to pronounce that grouping of letters, right?
Exactly. So if it's USA, it's U period, S period, A period, rather than just USA, then the screen reader is trying to make a word out of it.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good. All right, before we move on to content, are there any other, like, questions or suggestions from, you know, your experience or from your church? Anybody? And again, you can put them in the chat as well, and we'll make sure that we read them out loud.
I'm not sure where it fits, but when we talked about this at the webinar that we joined you for, we began adding what we call audio blogs now, where the post itself, the article, we've asked the author if they wanted to read it aloud, as opposed to having a screen reader where there's a real voice, mistakes and all, you know, that kind of thing, for a couple of reasons. First of all, in this time where we're so isolated, hearing a real voice that coming across to you can be the only voice maybe you've heard today. And so we thought that was really important. The other part of that is it's been interesting how whether the author of the post themselves or the page wanted to read that content, there's a lot of folks out there who want to actually serve, and that's a really important part of what we see in chronic illness disability, is that we don't lack any less desire to serve. There just have to be creative mediums to do that. And interestingly enough, we have overnight, we have a whole pool of people who are willing to read, and it's pretty easy to be done right on your phone with your voice memo. And then it's very easy to upload to a website. It's really no different than adding any other kind of media. There's probably a built-in media player on your website, and you can just include it somewhere on your post so that a person who wants to hear it can hear another voice. And that has been really, I really can't tell you how amazing it has been and how quickly that came together with really no thought. Like, we just said, what if we tried this? And I cannot keep up with getting them uploaded.
Wow.
So
I love that idea. Catherine, I think we should do that with our, yes, Catherine's giving me a thumbs up. I love that idea. And what a great way to just really involve not just the people, you know, viewing your website, but the people creating the content. I love that. Thank you. That was worth the price of admission right there. Love it.
and invite, and in many cases, some folks don't have the capacity to read everything, right, that they've written. So, it's really a great way to also develop a pool of folks who would read for you. And one person helped us figure out, like, we sent them a post and we called it an audition. And if it didn't work, it was just like we were trying it out to see. And there was a voice that needed some help. And we built some guidelines, in fact, to help people know what we wanted included in the post, because sometimes there's pictures and all that. Well, we don't need all that. We just want you to read the story, include the headings, because again, you can track back to that in the written text and find where that piece was that you wanted to hear about it. And we had a lot of discussions, funny as it was, whether we read the addresses of the scripture or just read the scripture. And we could not land, so we just let it up to whoever was reading to see if it kept with the flow, because some people really feel that's important, other people don't. It's a judgment call, not so much an expert opinion on it, because we want to hear the words of God, not if it matters which word. I mean, it's great that we know where it's in the Bible, but that's probably, when we're listening, not most important.
Right. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that idea. Love it.
I had another comment too, along those same lines. If you do videos, one of the things that you can do is upload your video over to YouTube, and by simply clicking, it will add the closed captioning for you. You could put that onto your website, and now it's accessible to the hearing impaired.
Yes, so that's a really good point. So one of the things that that's really important in making your website more accessible is making sure that if you have videos, they have closed captioning. And so this is something clearly I need to research more. And yes, there are different ways you can caption videos, and Bob just mentioned one. And so that's something we should really strive for as well. And I'm definitely still in the learning process there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about content. So we've talked about alt text, we've talked about headings, we've talked about the use of color and other things along those lines, but what kind of information should be included on your website? So I'm going to start with this was something that, so Amberly Brown, who herself is vision impaired, but is with the Banquet Network. And they put together a Disability in the Church website improvement plan. And she was not able to join us today, but these are some suggestions from the Banquet Network, and I just wanted to share them with you because I thought they were fantastic. So they suggest creating a tab for disabilities. So what might be on there is a disability statement that your church has. So something about, for instance, our church believes that all people are made in the image of God, Scripture says, et cetera. Or we desire to listen to your concerns, desires, and needs, et cetera. So having a disability statement. She also suggested creating a separate section based on what your churches have to offer. So, or separate sections based on what your church has to offer. So for instance, there could be a transportation section. So if I need help getting to church type of thing. There could be a whole statement on your building accessibility. So these could be statements on seating, stairs, ramps, elevators, handles, door width, accessible stage, lighting, handicapped toilet on each floor, etc. So this, that kind of information is of vital importance for somebody perhaps who uses a wheelchair before they can enter your building. And so having that information, or some way to access, to access that information is important on your website. This is a huge one, and so I'm in children's ministry at my church, and this is just huge for families too, of all kinds. Pictures and video of the inside of your building. So if you're someone who maybe has anxiety, being able to kind of experience what you're going to experience before you actually get there is really important. And then their suggestion is to have a building access report. So it's actually a place on your website for people to comment on what areas of the church are difficult to access. We don't know what we don't know. I invited one of our members of session who is a wheelchair user to just kind of walk around the building with me and give me her thoughts on where we need to make some improvements, like things that a person like me doesn't even see. And she is quadriplegic, so she uses a wheelchair that she could actually press a button and it can go up and down and that kind of thing, like raise her up or lower her down. And when we went to have the conversation, I met her in kind of our little gathering area where I meet anybody that I have a conversation with. And we have these high top tables, with tall, like cafe style tables and chairs. And like right away, I can't sit down with somebody who uses a wheelchair at that type of table. Like right away there it was like, oh, like I never realized that before. And so she was able to kind of take me around the building and show me some areas where we can make improvements. And my point there was, oh yeah, so having a place for people to make those kinds of observations is something that was recommended. Another thing that's recommended to have on your website is a description of how the service is presented. So, is the biblical message in the church presented visually, dramatically, musically? And again, this really is helpful for, people dealing with like anxiety and that type of thing to kind of know what to expect before they go in. Also, being able to have an idea of what options and services are available. So again, this is kind of when we're all back in our buildings, but are there sermon printed notes? Is it going to be PowerPoint? Are there bulletins that can be downloaded ahead of time? Let's see, are there sensory items available? Are there interpreters available? Is there a quiet room, like a quiet family room if you need a little sensory break? Is there a buddy system during service? So these are all things that you can address on your website. Also, as far as like children's ministry and Sunday school goes, that's where you can really, really get a lot of information in there and talk about what your buddy system looks like. If you have like special needs dedicated classrooms, if there's a quiet family room, so that type of thing. And also if you have forms, like intake forms that have to be filled out before a child can enroll in your Sunday school, make sure those are available on your website as well. You can describe your order of service. Again, that's really helpful for people. So there's going to be a sermon. Is there communion? Is there a gluten-free option for communion? Do you pass the tray or do you go to the table? And gosh, these days it's probably neither one. I don't know. Depends where you are. And then information about small groups and Bible studies. And if you have different, if you have options for varying abilities or languages, and make sure you include that information. And so again, when you look at your website as a complete outsider, and does it have that kind of information that you would be seeking before you ever step in the door of the church? Okay, that was a lot of me talking. So what are some things that you would look for, or that your church has, or that you've seen that you think, okay, we definitely want to add it? Doc.
Well, I was going to throw out a question kind of for everybody. that I've heard a lot of different things about it. So, everyone I talk to, obviously, when someone opens up your web page, the first thing they want to see is, who you are, what you're all about. So you need to have that information right there for them, and that's important. But then the next question is events, upcoming events, and what do you do? Is that something that you should have right there on that homepage where everyone sees, or have a button that says events and direct them somewhere else? I hear things on both sides, just trying to see from the group what is a best practice on that, for like getting the events there. And obviously, if you've got a lot of events, then all of a sudden your homepage can get cluttered by being event heavy.
Does anybody have a vote on that? I mean, just as a internet user, what are your thoughts on that?
I guess one of the things, your homepage certainly represents who you are, but there can be, that if you have a visual, for example, whatever your event might be, my suggestion might be is I would have that be on that page perhaps somewhere, but then redirect them right to a full page where they can get all of the information. So, find out more, do that teaser text to draw interest to the event. But your homepage, in my mind, is really a representation of who you are. An event is a moment in time. And so perhaps, adding that variation, to freshen up your page, but not clutter it, I think was part of what you were bringing up.
Yeah, that would be my vote as well. Yeah, you don't want to clutter it up, but that's the first place they're going to go. So they need to see that that's happening, but then be directed to another page. I guess that would be my vote. Anybody else? So let's talk a little bit about special needs ministry, specific, like if you have a page directed to special needs ministry. I know Doc is actually working on some video tours of different ministry areas, different churches and their special needs ministries. But having a little video tour of what a family can expect, that would be a great thing to have on your website. It'd be kind of a mini version of a social story, even perhaps, available so that families can review that before they come on a Sunday morning. Okay, Bronwyn says they have a video of buddies talking about why they like serving each week. I love that. That is awesome. Bronwyn has a fantastic group of, yeah, she's Shrek. Okay, there she is. Has a fantastic group of volunteers. A lot of them are teens. And so that's a tremendous way. And again, I always like anything we can do to involve our volunteers. So that's that's a win-win. That's great. Anybody else? How would you rate your current website? I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts on what they might do to improve. I mean, I know I have my ideas too of what I need to do. Does anybody have anything they're for sure going to implement based on some of the things we talked about today? Everybody's shy, or everybody's website is awesome?
It's not awesome, but I definitely need to go back and talk to whoever's designing it.
Yeah.
As I look at it now, I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, it just, again, we don't know what we don't know. And so I think, yeah, Michelle says her site is average. They do have a video of Michelle in the sensory room explaining the ministry. And I think I've actually watched that before, and it's really good. Let's see. I did want to talk a little bit about social media. And one of the things that, oops, and I printed it out and didn't bring it. But so a couple things as far as social media goes. Not every social media platform is as accessible as others. So make sure that you're not just putting all your information on, Instagram or something. If, Facebook may be more accessible than Instagram. Or maybe it's the other way around. I'm not sure. But don't just limit yourself to one social media platform. Has anybody heard of Camel Case? Do you know what I'm talking about when I say Camel Case? So if you're hashtagging, so let's say I'm hashtagging Key Ministry, I would do hashtag capital K, lowercase EY, capital M, so like a camel, you capitalize the first letter of each word, and I guess that makes it more usable as far as assistive technology goes. Did I get that right, Bob?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good.
Yeah.
Alt text, same thing. Use your alt text when you're posting images. And so if you're posting a graphic of an event and all the information is part of the image, remember that you then need to also include that in the text of your post. Include that image, include the event information, date and time and how to register and all that. What other social media things should we know about, or questions that people have?
I have more of a suggestion. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. One of the suggestions would be, it isn't social media, but if you're going to be part of for myself, if I'm part of a Bible study, when the person is typing it up, rather than just printing it off, if they email it to me, having that information beforehand, and then I can modify that information to a format that is good for me.
Yes.
If I needed large print, I'll print it off in large print. If I can put it on my tablet where I'll use my screen reader, that's great. And it's really not that much more inconvenient for the person who's leading the group for whatever that person is doing. If they're going to print it off or they've typed it up, they can just simply email it to me, and you can take advantage of those types of things. The same thing is true for the weekly bulletins. If you're going to email it off to the printer, you can just as well email me a copy as well, and then now it's accessible to me. And then just a slight comment when it comes to what should be on the website. When it comes to transportation, let us know whether you're on a bus line or not.
That's good. I didn't think of that one.
Yeah.
That's great. So yeah, a couple really great suggestions there. And yeah, when we're back worshiping in person in our buildings again, and maybe if you do have bulletins, yeah, for sure, you're right. That's and then the user can use it however that works best, using the screen reader or printing it out in large print. I love that. And I had not thought about the bus line. That's really good. All right, Pam, did you have something to add to that?
Social media. So yeah, I had a couple of things. So one of them was, for example, I'm just going to go to the bulletin, then I'm going to come back for a moment, but have you considered maybe making your bulletin more of like a blog post? Because then you can get that alt text in there. You can add the images. The screen readers can pick those up. You're already writing the text, so why not make it into a blog post, which also then makes it easily accessible to those who want to sign up for the bulletin through if you're using MailChimp or whatever. And one of the reasons I like doing a blog post and in MailChimp or Constant Contact, whatever you're using, just simply using a read more block. If you've ever made a mistake in an email and it's already out there, it's out there. You miss the link, it's gone. But if you do a blog post and you make a mistake, you can go back and make that correction in that blog post, and it still is in that person's inbox as a read more block. So, you know, they're going to see. And so that would be one suggestion about how you might implement a more strategic way of communicating. So it varies by you know, whatever their needs are. Another, you know, thought that is important is also consider your image sizes. You know, you mentioned social platforms, you know, they're different, and it's important to understand the differences, because if you have an event image and half of it is cut off because you've used it in, you know, Twitter, and you made it a square, which is an Instagram size, you know, so it's important to understand that whoever's making your images needs to know that they really, if you're going to post in those platforms, you need to know what size that image is, but it's also important to know how you're using it. So, you know, an image might be okay for a particular thing, but when you're using it as a link where you're actually linking it to the post, which you could do then with your bulletin, might I point out, if you did it as a blog post, now it could also be shipped out through your social media as a link, and you could pull that top image and draw attention to that week's bulletin. So thinking about those image sizes and the alt text is important, but understanding the platforms. And I certainly am by no means an expert, but this has been the learning curve. You know, Facebook, for example, and Twitter, you can include a link, but that doesn't work in Instagram. And we've seen a lot of people use things like link in bio. Well, that means every time that you update something, you have to change that bio link. And if you have multiple posts that week, it's a never ending, and you're always, if I'm running late. So consider, if you don't have what's called a link tree as in your Instagram, which allows you to have multiple links that they go to. It directs them to a page on your website, and then you can create multiple links. And if you do my Instagram account, you'll see the example. But then you could always have, for example, your bulletin. And so the newest bulletin would populate on that page, and you wouldn't have to change that. You always have your welcome page, those kinds of things. And we've also been playing with creativity. Not only, I didn't know it was called the camel thing, but we've been doing that with the hashtags for a long time. But we've also been trying to figure out how we can help people understand that there's what they're looking for. If I have multiple links in my link tree, and this is about prayer, so I have a button that's on my link tree that says prayer. So I'm telling them to go to link in bio, and I have a little arrow that says prayer, so that they know what they're looking for to help guide folks to wherever we're trying to help. So whatever medium, think about if you're an outsider, it doesn't do any good if you've included that link on Instagram, because it does nothing. You can't copy it, you can't get to it, but you can find creative ways around that. So helping people be included in all aspects, right down to the bulletin, to the alt text, anything we can do makes people feel a part of things and not so alone. And that's been really an important thing for us.
Wow. Is anybody else's head exploding? That's that just reminds me about once a week, my mom texts the family group chat to say, how do I get to, what does link in bio mean? How do I get to link in bio? Because she's trying to find a Pioneer Woman's recipe once a week. Okay. So if you go to, will they be able to access your Instagram account from the Chronic Joy website?
Sure. In the footer is all of our accounts. And you know, another piece of that is, you know, images are so important today. So it's important to include images with things, because that, again, even with visual impairment, sometimes you can see some portion of it. The idea, you can carry things across for people who maybe can't read well, but the image itself makes that point, you know, so that creative, trying to make things accessible for as many people. And so not only there, if you click on our Flickr account, we have, and I mentioned this at the other or that when we talked before, but we have a couple thousand images, and they're available free for download. And I think there's 404. We just recently organized it again by album, but on scripture. So if you're looking for a scripture image, you know, it's something just helps. And that's really, I think, an important aspect. So yes, all of those are available.
Yeah. And what I love, what you're talking about here is really, you know, trying to do whatever little things we can to reach everybody. We all learn differently. And so you kind of just making these little adaptations or adaptions really helps us share our message with as many people as possible and include as many people as possible. So that's great. Thank you.
And one kind of comment you made, or we were talking about before, about making things accessible within a building, the church building. Think of the questions that you don't ask, because the obvious disabilities, right? But there are so many hidden, you use the word hidden disabilities, we call them invisible illnesses, but think about chemical sensitivities. You know, if I'm sitting behind someone who has, you know, is drenched in
Really
perfume,
raised
I'm
our
going to be
hand.
unwell, right? If you know, consider the lighting, for example, where it's, you know, there's a lot of flashing and all of that, that can really trigger migraines for people. So, you know, it's unlikely that we'll make everything accessible, but I think, you know, the basic ideas that ADA started are just a jumping off point. I think we look beyond that and think about how can we make it for someone who's elderly and struggling in a particular way. I mean, we look at all aspects of that and consider, so that disability page might also be a really good like questionnaire and just maybe some check boxes. Do you have chemical sensitivities? Because then you can gauge how many people within your church congregation we need to talk about that. And you know, your quiet room is often considered for your families. That quiet room is generally not quiet because you have families in there.
Right.
Where is there actually a quiet room for someone who genuinely needs quiet?
So for those of you who aren't familiar with the book, Mental Health in the Church, so it's a book that was written by Dr. Steve Gersovich, who is Key Ministries founder and president, and you can access it. I think Catherine's probably putting a link in there right now, but he addresses several of the obstacles that families have when it comes to, you know, doing church, and he addresses sometimes they're very small things we can change, the physical things we can change in our church to kind of overcome some of those obstacles. Catherine, do you want to say anything else about like that book or the obstacles? I mean, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I mean, it kind of
in the book, you know, there's strategies for churches on, you know, some simple things that you can do just to be more inclusive, and they do go along with a lot of these kind of things. I would just also add that signage is huge,
a big one.
so that people just know, particularly if, you know, if they are you know, really anxious or, you know, have OCD, it can be very overwhelming to go into a new space. And so, you know, just making sure that there's clear signage, you know, once you enter the building, how do you get to the worship center? How do you get to children's ministry? How do you get to, I'm sorry?
The restroom. Like if you
How
don't
do you get to the
ask
restroom?
somebody, that's a huge one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Lots of other great strategies too, but I mean, those are some really simple things that any church can probably do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what about even just acknowledging that it's okay? It's not like you're going to be looked down on if you need to get up and walk out of the service. Maybe we need to just say those kinds of things from the pulpit, that you know, if you do have a reason to, this is a family. Sometimes you need to get up, and it's not just the screaming child that needs to walk out. Sometimes I just am overwhelmed by the message or the lights, and to not be sort of judged about that. So if that comes directly from the front, those kinds of things can change and reshape how disabilities and illnesses are viewed, that it's just the way life is, and we treat everybody here. And you mentioned the tall tables. How many of you have those in the back of your worship? Because what if there are people who have such terrible back things that they cannot sit in a chair. If you have those tall tables, it looks as if you can stand there, and it's okay. You're not like a person who's, you know, kind of just being weird and skulking around. That table allows you to be part of the community in a creative way. And so ministering on both sides, whether you need wheelchair accessibility or a place that I can't sit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point. All right. Well, this has been I've learned a lot today. So thank you. I really want to thank Bob and Pamela both for sharing their experience and their expertise. And this recording will be posted on our Vimeo and YouTube channels. You can access all that from keyministry.org, and we'll include links to all the resources that were mentioned. I encourage you to check out keyministry.org/events. Click on the events tab there. We do have some other webinars and roundtables coming up. And we will be back here as a group the 3rd Wednesday in September, and you can register for that. We'll have that registration up pretty soon. So thanks again, everybody. And I look forward, I would love to hear any feedback on some changes that you're going to suggest or implement based on our conversation today. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.